This episode is brought to you by Competitive Edge Research and Communication. Competitive Edge Research and Communication is San Diego's premier polling firm dedicated to quality research since 1987. John Nienstedt, president of Competitive Edge, proudly supports Voice of San Diego and other local civic organizations. Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show. Hello to everybody listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. My name is Andrew Keatts, and I'm here with a special guest this week, my friend Sara Libby.
Hey, what's up?
What's up, buddy? Well, all right, so you and I had a pretty good laugh this week.
We had quite a few good laughs,
Quite a few good laughs.
Amid terror and despair.
Right, which is the best time to laugh, I guess. So you sent me a copy of selected excerpts from the transcript of the jury selection of Martin Shkreli, the so-dubbed pharma bro.
Right.
This is the guy who, in various instances, has hiked up the costs of pharmaceuticals to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Earning him public ire.
Right, including AIDS drugs, EpiPens, things that people depend on. And
so he was found guilty of...
I think securities fraud. It didn't have to do with the pharmaceutical pricing.
Right. So he was found guilty. And then this week, the court released the transcript of their jury selection process. And they had to go through hundreds of potential jurors, to find a suitable selection of people who could render a verdict without bias.
Yeah, and if you remember, the reason I originally sent it to you wasn't just because it was hilarious. It was because it was so hilarious that I was certain it was not real. And I was just like, could you help me find the little asterisk on this article that says this is a joke?
We had a full conversation at the end of which we declared it was certainly a joke.
It's definitely fake.
Definitely fake.
Yeah.
Only when other stories came out concluding that these were in fact real conversations that took place. So I'm going to read, here's the one that I copied and pasted and sent to you and said, this is the tell. There's no way that any person ever said this in the jury selection box.
Right.
I said, here's how we know it's a joke. This is the court. Ma'am, we're going to excuse you. Juror number 52, how are you? Juror number 52. When I walked in here today, I looked at him, and in my head, that's a snake. Not knowing who he was, I just walked in and looked right at him, and that's a snake. Brofman, the defense attorney, so much for the presumption of innocence.
Yeah.
It's just too perfect that I just assumed this must be a gag. But I thought it was actually I was like, they did a gag, but never did the Onion thing where you introduce a true element of absurdity to flip it on its head. It was like they played it too straight. But in fact, actually, this is just how the world thinks of this guy, apparently.
Yeah, and there was a semi-absurd moment, but it's still related to something that actually happened. Yeah. And so this is when one juror has already been dismissed, already declared that they can't be impartial.
Go away now.
The judge has said, you're out, you're done, I get it, you don't like him. And he's still talking to the judge just to add, and he disrespected the Wu-Tang Clan. And that's how the transcript ends. Because apparently he did disrespect the Wu-Tang Clan. He bought their album and then refused to release it to the public.
And I guess that would make it harder for me to render a verdict too.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Another person at one point just says, I think he's a greedy little man. Anyway. All right. Anyway, so that's Martin Shkreli.
You should read it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's on many websites at this point. Okay, so Sara, I wanted to do something a little bit different than we normally do on the show this week. Typically, we go over the day's news, but I kind of wanted to step back and have just a broader conversation with you because you're a smart person.
Thanks.
You run this website.
I do.
You're aware of the news. Pay close attention to national news.
Yeah.
And I am consistently finding myself grappling with how local news can ever be expected to break through the din of news about President Donald Trump. Every day it's a fresh scandal. Every day it's a new crisis. And I'm not saying that to suggest that people are hyperventilating. It legitimately is a different crisis every day.
Yeah, and it's a crisis on the scale that would have brought down any previous presidency.
Right. So,
but there have been like 473 of them.
Yeah, there's like 3 in a day sometimes. Yeah. And so while that's happening, like I think it's only reasonable to expect that a typical news consumer only has so much capacity for news of any kind. They've got lives to lead, right? You can't consume news as a full-time job the way we do,
right,
if you don't work in news. And given the scale of these things, it seems like it upsets me, but it also seems reasonable that local news is the thing that loses out.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth. Like when I think of one side of the coin, I think, well, that's it. No one's ever reading local news again. It's pointless.
Yeah, right.
And then, I think of the other side, and I think of the work that we've done since November, and it's really been some of our most impactful work that has really stuck in people's minds and has produced the biggest actual impact in San Diego. I'm thinking obviously of the Sandag investigation, and we saw within the last week that Gary Gallegos is probably out very soon, and you have people all over San Diego who suddenly know what Sandag is and know to be outraged about it.
Yeah, well, so that's true. So maybe one possibility is that my concerns aren't really being borne out, that people are getting their news just as they normally would, and whatever amount of Trump insanity is borrowing from something else, like maybe that borrows from their leisure time, not from their news diet.
I think if anything, people just are consuming news more and are paying attention to the news more, and that has trickle-down effects that impact people who do what we do. Mm-hmm. Me as a news consumer, and I'm reading national news, I sort of think like these stories are so big and it's just like it feels so hopeless, and I just fall into this like pit of despair, and it feels like these are such big problems that I can never wrap my mind around. And I think that local news is the opposite for people because it's something really specific that they understand and that actually impacts their lives. And so like I can't do anything about the fact that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to hijack an American election, but the school budget impacts my kid's classroom, and they're not giving me numbers about whether her teacher's laid off, and that's something really easy for me to understand and that impacts my world in a really specific way.
Yeah, and so, well, I guess things fit into two different categories. For one thing that's worth saying is in December we ran a fundraising campaign, and it was far and away the most successful member-driven fundraising campaign we've ever had. And we have a little service that when people put in their donations, there's a field for like why they're doing it, and we can actually see those as they come in. And the prevailing sentiment was news is more important now than ever. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe the opposite is the case. Maybe all of this is actually driving an appreciation and a thirst for local news that has actually really helped people. But the other side of it is, like, for instance, a month ago, one of my Sandag stories was ready to drop. We had finished it. We were done. It was edited. It was ready to go. We had it, and we were just deciding when to release it. And like when you have a big story like that, you don't want to wait. You really want to get it out as quickly as possible. And this was the very moment that Donald Trump Jr. had released his emails demonstrating that he had in fact colluded with the Russian government to help his father get elected. And like I blame no one. I blame no one at all for being more concerned with that than reading my fifth big revelation in the Sandag investigation that afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't knock reporters for feeling like they keep getting, usurped by these stories. I wrote a story for City
Or
Lab.
trumped.
You did it. You did it.
That's
I
the
wrote
only one.
a story about state housing policy for a national outlet, and it dropped the day Comey was fired. I'm just like, I guess no one cares about state housing policy today.
Yeah, I don't know. So, well, what about your conversations with your friends that aren't in news? That do they seem to have any changed disposition towards local news right now?
I do think if there's a change, it's just slightly heightened awareness of news, and they're consuming kind of whatever they can, and that includes a lot of TV newscasts. So I think people are inclined to watch their local news as much as they ever were.
Yeah.
I think if anything, there's just a heightened overall sense of we should be paying attention.
And now I guess this is a little bit ancillary to our discussion, but there's been a lot of a lot of pearl clutching about the president using the term fake news so often, and what it does to demolish the public's trust in media. Do you think that has had any sort of effect locally? Do you find people are more skeptical about basic reporting because they say, well, the president has conveyed this idea that we can't believe what other reporters are writing, and so that's as true about the New York Times as it is the San Diego Union Tribune, KPBS, or Voice of San Diego?
I don't know that it's made people more wary so much as it's kind of given a name and a face to this thing that many people have assumed all along.
Yeah, that's true.
So now instead of saying your liberal media bias or whatever and kind of painting it in these vague terms or however they want, there's a specific term for them to use. It's become more weaponized.
Yeah, that's true. And it's easier.
Easier.
You can
Yeah.
And there's actually a tribal element to it now. So where you used to maybe just say, well, you can't believe everything you read in the paper. Now if you say fake news, there's a signaling going on that's it's identified with a particular group or movement.
And it's just such a lazy shorthand too, because there's no you need to correct this, you got this wrong. It's just a broad fake news.
Yeah.
It's all wrong.
Just you're untrustworthy and dumb. Get out of here. Yeah, I don't know. So let's in the end, what do you make of the Trump effect on local news? What do you think we are on net better positioned, worse positioned, lost attention, gained attention?
I would say the arrow points slightly toward gained attention. I think people just have a heightened awareness, especially of political campaigns and things like that, big decisions that are being made on their behalf. I do think people are more aware and they care a little more.
Yeah, I guess that's true now that you mention it. My family, who frankly has never taken a great deal of interest in my reporting, suddenly is oh, you're doing really important work. It's great that reporters are out there. And I don't know. I don't know if it materially has changed their day-to-day life or if they feel that way about the Baltimore Sun, but it's at least an idea that's in their head now.
Yeah, absolutely. And even my family members who were inclined to read news before are just becoming more active in their local, issues. And so I think whatever your base starting point was, you're just doing a little bit more than you were before.
Yeah. So one of the, last year during the election, I had this idea that I never actually did for various reasons. We didn't really think it was a good fit, but I wanted to go when Bernie Sanders was here and then later when Donald Trump was here. I wanted to go and talk to attendees and people waiting in line, not to make them look silly or anything, but to just ask these people who were drawn out of their homes for a political event, were willing to wait in line for potentially hours to get into a political event, clearly in some way had strongly formed political opinions in some way, and ask them what their thoughts were on the city council election. Yeah. And ask them where they stood on Measure K and L, or where they stood on something else. And I had a couple people who I ran that idea by, and they were like, "Oh, what are you trying to make everybody look dumb? You catch people and then portray them as stupid, which was not my goal. But I did want to understand like how much of this stuff that happens up here that becomes, you know, these phenomena that we talk about actually trickles down to the local level at all.
Yeah, and I think with those two candidates in particular, the division is striking because they're both people who kind of galvanized people who may not have been likely to care about things before or go to a political rally before. And so maybe this is, you know, a wildly broad brush, but I feel like maybe if you went to a Hillary Clinton or a Jerry Brown rally, even those people maybe did have thoughts on Measure L and K, or you know, a Kevin Faulconer rally even.
I would say like when Meg Whitman was running, if you went to a Meg Whitman rally,
Absolutely.
I would presume that everyone there had a pretty strong opinion up and down the ballot.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so in any case, let's actually talk about one of our big stories this week.
Let's.
So, bit of a background. We're gonna bring on Mario Koran to talk about this story that he's been working on for, I don't know, better part of a year, really.
Yeah, I think longer, maybe.
Yeah, and there was a big shoe to drop this year. So this all started with his idea to interrogate the foundational numbers about the school district's graduation rate, and that led in a number of different ways, one of which was the discovery that large numbers of students, for one reason or another, were leaving the district during their high school years and going to charter schools. Now, charter schools are regulated and run by the district technically, but they are not counted into the district's official graduation rate.
Yeah, and in particular, many of those who left were going specifically to these online charter schools that specialize in helping you recover credits.
Yeah. Okay, so big new news on that today, and let's bring in Mario Koran. All right, my good buddy Mario, my friend, my very good friend.
What's up, Andy?
How are you doing, bud?
I'm great.
All right, so all these kids are leaving. They're going to credit recovery charter schools. This allows them to be deducted from the district's graduation rate. What was it this week that you learned that progressed this story?
Sure. So what happened this week is I got back a response to public records request that I had put in about a year ago.
About a year ago.
That's a side story.
Yeah.
So let's.
Mario has since moved on to covering an entirely new beat, but had to jump back into this because it took the district a year to respond.
All right. So yes, Mario, not our education reporter, writing about education because of a request that you made back when Barack Obama was president. What did that records request say?
Okay. So the numbers that we got back showed us that the students who were leaving and going to charter schools. Now, this isn't specific just to the credit recovery charter schools or the charter schools that specialize. This is all charter schools. So the students who left the district and went to charter schools had a combined grade point average of 1.75.
Okay. So first things first, that's low.
It's not good.
It's not great.
Not great. It's substandard.
In fact, it's not high enough to graduate from the district.
Okay.
In order to graduate from the district, you need to have a 2.0 and pass all the required classes.
Okay. All right. So, and this is within the class of 2016, which means these are people who transferred between 2012 and 2016.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. And why this is significant, why we chose the class of 2016 is back when we started looking at it, of course, it was timely, but it was also the time when they set a record high graduation rate of 91%. They graduated 91% of the students.
And they were very bashful about this. They didn't talk about it much at all. They didn't make a big thing about it or anything like that.
On the contrary. So they were
okay.
There were parades in the street.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they were very proud of that. So we made it a point right away to try to unravel everything that went into that graduation rate and what exactly it measured.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the second part of what was new this week is not only do we know that the students who transferred out were the ones that were low performing and least likely to graduate
On account of that 1.7 GPA.
Right, on account of that.
Right.
Got to remember that. In addition, I reached out to school board president Richard Barrera to get his take on what these numbers told us and what they don't tell us. And in case he volunteered that, oh yeah, well, that may have been part of the pattern that Superintendent Cindy Martin discovered years ago, which is that teachers at district schools were in some cases counseling kids to go, urging them to go to charter schools so they could graduate.
Okay. So this is pretty important, and I'll do my best to articulate why. You had months ago written a story that said you weren't able to get the data from the school district itself. So you didn't have comprehensive data, but you did have information from specific charter schools who had received large amounts of students from the district. And some of those students anecdotally told you that their guidance counselors or teachers or principals at the school that they started at had urged them to go to this other school, specifically because they weren't going to graduate if they stayed in the other school.
Correct.
At the time you reported that, it would not go nearly far enough to say that the school district disputed the claim. It would be more accurate to say that they created a website specifically designed to call you a dum-dum.
Yeah. So actually, the last time I co-hosted the podcast
Yes.
with you, this website had just dropped, and we spent the entire time talking about how incredible it was.
Yes.
So just to reiterate, the school district spent man hours and time and taxpayer money creating a website solely dedicated to refuting Mario's reporting.
Hold on, I'm gonna cut you off there, Sarah. Okay, hold that thought, listeners. You hold that thought in your head. We're gonna cut the show here. If you're listening on News Radio 600 Kogo, that's fine. Grab your phone, search on iTunes for the Voice of San Diego podcast, subscribe, listen to the most recent episode. We're going to carry this conversation over on the other side of this little short musical interlude. Also on the other side, we're going to have a conversation with Lynn Reaser. She's the chief economist at Point Loma Nazarene University about the NAFTA renegotiations that are going on right now and what that might mean for San Diego's economy. Stick with us.
This podcast is sponsored in part by the Downtown San Diego Partnership, a nonprofit advocate for the economic vitality and growth of downtown. From side-splitting annual dinners to free weekly yoga classes, the Downtown Partnership hosts dozens of can't-miss events each year. Get your tickets now to the annual Taste of Downtown, one of the premier culinary events in San Diego. Experience the flavors of downtown by sampling tasty bites from more than 40 restaurants throughout the Gaslamp Quarter, Financial District, and East Village on September 14th. To buy tickets and learn more about upcoming events, becoming a member, and the partnership's vision for downtown San Diego, visit www.downtownsandiego.org.
All right, thank you for hanging with us. We left you with a bit of a cliffhanger. This is like the beginning of a Game of Thrones episode where you go through the previously on. What was previously on is you were about to tell us what was in this website that was directed specifically at Mario Koran's reporting. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it was a website talking about how Mario's reporting on the graduation rate was a bunch of lies.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, one of the things they zeroed in on was this idea that they were pushing low-performing students out and encouraging them to attend charter schools.
Yeah. So I think they specifically not only said that they wouldn't do that or that they weren't doing that, they said that to do that would be, quote, morally wrong and financially foolish.
That's what they said.
Okay. So they said, not only are we not doing this, but it would be evil if we did. Also, it would be counterproductive. We'd be hurting ourselves. So it's crazy for you to think we're doing it.
Right. So fast forward to this week, and Mario gives a call to Richard Barrera.
So now you take the actual numbers that the very district that put this website together gave to you, and you say to them, here's what the numbers say. And then what did he say?
Yeah, he was very he was very casual about the admission. He just said, Cindy found this to be happening a long time ago, years ago, in fact.
Years ago.
So that's new, right? There may have been a casual way of delivering the news, but it was a new revelation for us.
Yeah, he didn't go like, "This is crazy, breaking. Yes, we did that." He just said like, "Yeah, we do that.
we do that.
Yeah, we do
Been
that.
doing it for years."
We definitely totally do the morally wrong and financially foolish thing for a very long time."
And in fact, like in a weird ass backwards way, he was saying because we do that all the time, it's a defense of it couldn't have been the reason the grad rate was so high because like we've been doing this forever.
Yeah,
so it wasn't like a unique thing to this one year.
He was like you're trying to pin this on our 2016 graduation rate, but those are good on account of it is standard operating procedure for us to be morally wrong and financially foolish. Is that fair? Am I being unfair?
No, I think these are, this is indisputable. These in fact aren't even the things that the district is disputing at this point, right? So,
okay, yeah. So they
came up with a whole new set of disputes to this story, but it didn't happen to be one of them that they are indeed pushing students out to go to charters.
Yeah, that seems to be...
we all agree.
Yeah.
We all agree that they're
established.
morally wrong and financially foolish. That's stipulated.
Yeah.
Okay, so... Okay, the San Diego Unified School District is morally wrong and financially foolish. Stipulated. Okay.
On this one point.
On this one issue. We'll put that over to the side for now. What else did they say to you?
Oh, well,
what's their new complaint?
The district did not really in fact, they didn't dispute any of the factual findings.
We should also add that like one of the things that they had said was that kids leaving for charter schools may not, in fact, help them at all. It might hurt them because we don't know whether on net those kids have good or bad grades. And in fact, they might be losing a lot of really good students.
Sure.
So going back to that 1.7 GPA thing, we now know that is not true.
Right. And they make the point, and it could be argued that that this is true, that had those students who were earning a 1.75 GPA at the time they left, had they stayed in the district, that there's no proof that they wouldn't have graduated, which is, that's fair.
That's true.
And especially when we look at some of the other ways that the district is helping kids to graduate, specifically online credit recovery classes. When we visited a school several months back, we found and we saw just how easy these classes were to cheat.
And this is basically one of their responses to this phenomenon is to create their own version of these schools that kids were transferring to in the first place.
Absolutely.
To spend money to create this system so that they don't have to push these kids out. They can instead just move them from, Kearney Mesa High or wherever to their own credit recovery system.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So is there anything else at this point? What else do we need to know about this graduation rate, Sarah?
So one point that I've seen Mario and some other education watchers make that I think is really important is that one kind of accusation that's always levied at charter schools is that they cherry pick their students. And so sure, they might have really high test scores, but it's because they're controlling who gets in, and a public school district has to take everyone. But,
or they like manage kids out. They make you feel unwelcome till you decide to leave.
But so what Mario's found is like they're doing the opposite of that, is where they're, maybe not cherry picking high performing students to come in, but they are encouraging low performing students to leave. And that benefits them the same way that they accuse charter schools of benefiting from.
Yeah, it's like essentially the same practice, right?
Right. No, I think that's a really good point. And that's absolutely true. I think what I found over covering education for 4 years is that typically, almost always, we're looking for the bad actors. We're looking for the heroes and the villains. And so when we get into this very, very familiar dispute between regular district schools and charter schools, where we can talk about cherry picking, and we put the blame on one side versus the other. But when we take a look at it and really kind of looking close, we find that the truth is a lot messier than that. Mm-hmm. That, in fact, a lot of these students, charter schools and regular district schools, are, in fact, sharing students, and students are transferring back and forth between them.
Yeah.
And that's not as clean of a narrative, but it's actually what we found to be a much more accurate case.
Well, and also, similarly, charter schools aren't a monolith. There might be some that are very much doing this thing that you described, it's kind of a standard narrative about charter schools, that they accept a random assortment of students, but then they select on the back end by forcing kids out, and that's why they're able to show these fantastic results. Well, some charter schools actually are a completely different model, like Charter School of San Diego, that does this credit recovery system. So that's one thing. And then the other is like, to the extent that the San Diego Unified has neighborhood schools emulating charter schools, and that students are able to exercise school choice within their own district schools, the lines between these distinctions are just really blurry at this point.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that's it. Mari, do you want to hang out for Hero and Goat?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to.
All right. So let's start with our Hero of the Week. We're going to go ahead and give this one to the city of San Diego, which, boy, the fastest I have ever seen the city of San Diego do anything.
Any single thing.
Any single thing. I bumped into some city staffers yesterday and said that, and they were like, yeah, that's the joke that every person has made in City Hall today.
Well,
congratulations.
good job to us.
Yeah, congratulations. You're the least original person. So the city of San Diego, as around the country, different cities started swiftly removing Confederate monuments for various reasons. Just as people in San Diego started to recognize that there was a plaque honoring Jefferson Davis, the former president of the Confederacy, in Horton Plaza Park, a petition to tear it down came down, what popped up. And I mean, basically at the same time that started happening, Mayor Faulkner put an order in to city staff to remove it, and they did. And in the same day, they put a new tile in its place, caulked it and everything. And so that's taken care of. That issue has been solved.
Yeah. Remember when it took like 175 years to build a sidewalk extension in San Ysidro?
This was simpler, and
Right.
It happened quickly. I guess that's what happens if you don't want to end up on CNN Chiron for some bad event. But in any case, quick action.
They did it.
And took care of it. All right, Hero of the Week. There you go. And now our Goat of the Week.
You lose! Good day, sir!
This one goes to Judge Gary Creep.
Oh boy.
It's kind of low-hanging fruit given the
This is
ways in which he's made the news over the years.
It's one of these guys that just could perpetually be a choice. You
Yeah.
just go to the well whenever
Yeah.
you need one. Yeah.
Pick him out of the goat hat.
Yeah.
So this is a San Diego judge who, was a prominent birther before being elected, and upon taking the bench immediately started making disparaging comments about women and Latinos. And so this week he was, publicly reprimanded by a judicial commission, and it was basically the strongest kind of censure that you can get aside from being removed from the bench.
One step off of you. Okay. Well, which is interesting because at the time he was elected, there was a lot of reporting about this guy and his past. And I think there was a general thought that like sooner or later he was going to get removed from the bench, that this just wasn't going to last very long. And he's survived this at least.
Survived this, but he did kind of run into trouble immediately in the way that it was predicted. I think he referred to one women lawyer as a prostitute jokingly. He brought up, pregnant women's status as pregnant women, apropos of nothing, and things like that.
Yeah. Go to the week. Easy one.
100.
100. All right, so stick with us. We're about to welcome Lynn Reaser, chief economist at Point Loma Nazarene University, to talk about the NAFTA renegotiations and what they might mean for San Diego's economy. All right, and we are now joined on the phone by Lynn Reaser, chief economist at Point Loma Nazarene University. Friend of the podcast, Lynn's been on before to discuss her now oft-cited study on the various regulatory costs of housing in San Diego. And also just a source that I've talked to for a very long time in San Diego, back when I was at the Daily Transcript and was a business reporter. We used to talk more frequently than we do now, but has always been very helpful in helping a layman like me understand the complex workings of our economy. So, Lynn, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
So, okay, NAFTA renegotiations have started. Can you help us understand in pretty general terms, what's on the table here? What are the terms of this agreement that are being potentially reconsidered right now?
Well, potentially all of NAFTA's parts of the agreement are up for negotiation at this point. At the background, there is a real debate on whether or not we should be using as a litmus test the trade deficit. Most economists would view more trade as a better outcome for all than less trade. It's not a zero-sum game, and so we should not really be defining the success of trade policy by the size of a surplus that a country might run. So we need to get through and past that fundamental difference of view of trade. Assuming we can get past that barrier, let's talk about potentially how we can improve NAFTA. And all sides seem to agree that NAFTA was negotiated at a time when we did not really have the flow of electronic information, internet that we now have, and it needs to be modernized to capture, one, more of the service sector, two, be able to do a better job in protecting property rights, three, deal with the flow of electronic information, and then update other areas of the agreement that would be important to discuss. But those three fundamental areas are major parts that need to be updated.
Okay.
Yes, you kind of usurped my first question. So Mayor Kevin Faulconer held a press conference this week with other mayors along the border, the mayor of Tijuana, for example, and they used this same phrase that you used. We need to modernize NAFTA several times. And so do you have a sense, can you drill in a little bit more to what exactly people like Kevin Faulconer would like to see updated?
Well, I think it needs to basically encompass the whole service economy, but in particular guarantee companies the intellectual protection of property rights in the data services area. And I think the biggest fear and the pushback would be that if we start to raise barriers on areas of traditional trade, be it avocados, beef, manufactured goods, if we start to raise those tariffs or quotas or other kinds of import restrictions that would just address this focus on the trade deficit per se. So it's really to look at more, hopefully, these areas that have been neglected in the past.
And so in the last, year and a half, when suddenly trade has emerged as, really a primary fighting area in American politics, I think it has been introduced as a really in base terms that there's been a question introduced about whether globalization per se is good and whether we have received net benefits from these agreements. Is that issue on the table? I mean, you're talking about modernizing things and getting into intellectual protections. Seems like essentially introducing a new element to the existing framework of NAFTA. I wonder, do you think it is possible that we would actually see a fundamental shift in the way NAFTA treats manufacturing jobs being put into Mexico as opposed to the United States, and that sort of basic question about trade between two different countries?
Well, these trade negotiations regarding NAFTA and trade in general do have two very different constituencies, and this is true within the administration. The one side is just looking at to modernize it, to bring in these issues of intellectual property and the service sector, and that's what the Canadians and the Mexicans and the more progressive Americans part of the administration and the mayor is all embracing. Then there's the other side, which views trade deficits as bad, is very much against globalization, believes that these trade deficits have killed American jobs, and wants to go back very much to a much earlier period of international history where these trade surpluses were valued per se as being very important. And most economists would really reject that view. But I think most economists today have said perhaps we have ourselves to blame for not doing a better job in explaining the benefits that globalization has brought. The good news is that we actually internationally have not seen a major retreat away from global trade and the free flow of trade and capital. But there certainly remains that threat and a certain constituency that wants to drive us down that path. And that's where the core battle on NAFTA will be very critical.
Yeah, and I guess I'm maybe asking you to prognosticate a little bit, which forgive me for, but do you get much of a sense that some of those most basic elements of a trade deal are going to be up to negotiation right now? Like, is there a reasonable possibility, do you think, that fundamental paradigm will be questioned?
There definitely is a risk. I mean, when the administration first came to office, there were elements in Washington that very much wanted to emphasize the evils of a trade deficit and the perils that were being imposed on the manufacturing sector. In the last several months, it appeared that we were perhaps more shifting to a focus on modernizing NAFTA. And at this point, though, it's not clear exactly what road we will ultimately follow. If you had to ask me, I would say that perhaps I'm more optimistic that we will be focusing more on modernizing rather than going back to an era where we impose large tariffs and basically build up the walls. I will tell you, though, that even at this point, the fear of that happening is causing Mexico to diversify its trade base. So it is going to other countries in Latin America looking for outlets for its export products, such as in Brazil or Chile or other countries. So that is the risk, even as we speak, of those policies that were to be more aggressively pursued.
And so then I want to shift to a really localized look at this, which is, so obviously San Diego is in close proximity to Mexico, and this maybe has been the case for a long time, but certainly in recent years you've heard a lot of discussion from the Economic Development Council in town, the Chamber of Commerce, the biotech industry, about the benefits to San Diego's economy with a close link and relationship with Mexico, and specifically the Baja region, and this increased discussion of the San Diego Baja mega region.
Exactly.
Yeah. So tell me, specifically, how much are those sorts of relationships potentially in danger if there are some really basic renegotiations of the terms of NAFTA? Do we have any sort of relationships that would be strong and would be able to persist regardless of what was renegotiated? Or are some of those things, the things that we always hear about are people who do really high-tech research on the San Diego side of the border and some of their manufacturing on the Mexico side of the border. Are those sorts of things going to be endangered by these discussions potentially?
Well, first of all, the background. We've talked about the mega region, Puro County, San Diego County, Baja California, for a long time. It's perhaps not received as much traction as we thought might happen earlier on, but it does seem to be receiving a lot of support from the current mayor and the city council. We just in terms of the numbers, we'll do about $58 billion of total trade with Mexico from San Diego this year. That's by far our largest trading partner. In recent years, Mexico has opened up its supply channels for the defense sector to San Diego and California firms. That is something new. We have this whole inflow and exchange of people, very skilled engineers coming from Mexico who can fill that skill gap in San Diego. So we built this tight network. Now, how much of that would be unwound by an adverse trade relationship or any major cracking of NAFTA instead of reinforcing it? I would say some of these relationships will remain, but they would not be the same as they would if you had a NAFTA that was still progressive and very much enforced, because Mexico will work to try to diversify its outside relationships. It would weaken. It would not end our relationship. It would mean we would have to work hard from San Diego, but any kinds of increases in tariffs or anti-capital or even labor or goods protectionist measures would have an impact.
This is maybe more of a political question, but Mayor Kevin Faulconer gets a lot of attention here in San Diego and statewide for saying, he's going to go to Washington and he's going to tell, the president and everyone what he thinks of NAFTA and how important trade is to San Diego's economy. Do you have a sense of how much clout someone like him and people speaking for this border region really have? Or are people in D.C. so far removed that they're like, that's cute, we don't really care?
Well, one would hope there would be some impact. Hopefully, particularly he might have the ear of the Secretary of Commerce or the Secretary of the Treasury, who seem to be more on the progressive side of trade, who seem to want to be modernizing NAFTA as opposed to focusing on this, putting up more trade barriers issues. So he might have find an ear in those parts of the White House. So I would say there could be some impact, but whether or not it can really swing the pendulum if the president's already has his mind up, maybe a question. However, he could have some greater influence on Congress. Congress ultimately will have to take NAFTA's changes to the floor and get the vote. So it's important that not only the mayor's voice be heard in Washington, but the California congressional delegation also have a strong stand, unified stand, and powerful one, so that regardless of what these negotiations develop, that the actual legislation and changes in NAFTA would be either voted on or voted against in Congress.
Okay, and so we're going to wind up here, but the timeline I had heard was that they hope to actually have these negotiations wrapped by the beginning of next year, I believe, and that they kind of want this to be put to bed prior to the 2018 elections. I don't know how possible that is, but let's stipulate for the time being that actually happens. When you go about doing your sort of short-term economic forecasting, how much of a headwind do you consider this? Do you think that this has the real possibility of costing or benefiting San Diego jobs in the short term? And how big of a factor is this in terms of the total health of our regional economy?
Well, first there was after the election, of course, a huge plunge in the value of the peso, as the view was a worst-case scenario. And that did have an impact on the region. We know Mexican buying power was hurt dramatically, so that we did not have the shoppers coming over the border. It raised the value of the dollar, made our exports less competitive, so it was a huge impact. The peso has since recovered significantly, but now we're in this uncertainty mode. And uncertainty, as you both know, is the worst element for the economy. So it's basically going to cause any businesses to put contracts, investments, business relationships, setting up any kind of establishments with new suppliers on hold until they figure out what is actually going to be the case when NAFTA's new rules are written. And so we have this void where people are just essentially not moving forward, and that's unfortunate. And as I say, in the meantime, Mexico may be looking for other options so that they are not, waiting in the void if nothing develops. So that's the downside of all this. Even if in the best case scenario you actually have something done early in 18, and of course the way we've watched so far this year, everything has been delayed for one reason or another by other circumstances. So one can't rule out that won't also be the case with NAFTA.
Lynn Reaser, Chief Economist at Point Loma Nazarene University. Thanks for coming on the show yet again.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Today's show was produced by me, Andrew Keatts, and Scott Lewis. It was recorded by Adam Greenfield in the Great Voice of San Diego podcast studio, where we also produce Good Schools for All and Kinsey Moreland's CultureCast. Thank you to our partners at Kogo 600.
Subscribe to the Voice of San Diego Podcast Network on iTunes to stay in the loop about all of our shows.